Thank you. We're honored to welcome two outstanding veteran journalists who have a wealth of experience and knowledge about their two countries' elections and government, the U.S. and Germany. And today's conversation is really meant to deepen our understanding of both of these countries, their recent elections, the differences between them, and the links between the two countries. We are going to try to keep our comments and questions up here brief and hear from you, so we'll have plenty of time to ask questions. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce our two speakers and then pass the floor over to them. Soledad O'Brien is the chairwoman of Starfish Media Group. She is a television anchor and correspondent. She's worked for CNN, Al Jazeera America, and HBO Sports. She replaced Alex Trebek as the moderator of the National Geography Bee, so I'm quite jealous of her. But those are big shoes to fill. And she's currently a distinguished visiting fellow at Harvard's Graduate School of Education, so not only are we welcoming her to Harvard today, we're welcoming her to Harvard for the semester. So thank you very much for coming, not just today, but for the time. And we hope to see more of you.
Thank you, my pleasure.
23 years ago today, if any of you are looking at your calendars, East Germany and West Germany were reunited. So it's kind of a nice day to mark with this specific event. And Georg Mascolo is an investigative journalist who lived through those moments and documented them in important ways. He has worked for the Spiegel Group in various guises since 1988. You'll notice the date is quite important. And he started working for the Spiegel Group, reporting and producing television features and documentaries, particularly covering the fall of the Berlin Wall. So he was documented the entire set of events. And on November 9th in 1989, he and his camera team, Rainer Marz and Hermann Biester, documented the historical moment of East Germany Border Patrol opening the checkpoint at Bornholmer Strasse. In 2011, the video footage was voted the UNESCO's Memorable Moment of the International Register. So congratulations, that's quite an accomplishment. In 1992, Mr. Mascolo transferred to the magazine Der Spiegel, where he started as the deputy head of the Berlin Bureau and later became department head of the National Affairs Desk in Hamburg. In August of 2004, he went to Washington as a political correspondent for Der Spiegel, and in 2007, became one of the two bureau chiefs in Berlin. Since February 2008, he held the position of editor-in-chief at Der Spiegel together with Matthias Müller, and he too is joining us. So he will be at the Weatherhead Center starting in about a month, right? So welcome to Harvard.
All depends on the government shutdown and the question if they will issue a visa or not. But hopefully.
We're doing our best. So welcome to Harvard today, and hopefully in the near future we'll see you frequently. So I would like to pass the floor to you. Should we start with Georg?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. You just mentioned that today is the 23rd anniversary of the German reunification, and that reminds me when I first met Chancellor Merkel. I was a young television correspondent, and she showed up in autumn 1989 at one of the new political parties in East Berlin, and so we met for the first time. What she achieved on September 22nd was her first real victory as a politician. Remember that? I mean, she's since 13 years now heading the Christian Democratic Party. She's 8 years chancellor, but she never scored a huge victory. She was elected twice, but on the first time, on the last meter, something went wrong. The SPD was almost as strong as the CDU was. Polls indicated otherwise before. And the second time when she got re-elected, it was the FDP, the liberals, who carried the victory with almost 15%. So what was Angela Merkel desperately looking for in September? A real victory. Not always flying high in the polls and then something goes wrong. She wanted to look like a real winner. And I have to say, she achieved it. It's almost a landslide. And the problem starts, and I'm sure we talk about it. Let's look to the landslide for a second. 40.5% means close to an absolute majority, means almost as strong as Konrad Adenauer was in 1957, after he was able to negotiate the return of the lost war prisoners from Moscow, or as popular as Helmut Kohl was after the reunification. Why did she win so strongly? I think it's pretty easy. You have a saying here in the United States, and I have to borrow it, that the economy is stupid. Germany is doing remarkably well. The unemployment rate is 6.8% compared to 12.1% in the Eurozone. And in every speech, Angela Merkel used the same phrase. You know me, we had 4 very good years together and never changed a winning team. And that was why Angela Merkel in these elections, in my view, was unbeatable. There was nobody who could have winning against her. According to the polls, Angela Merkel has the best chancellor image since 1990. Only Helmut Kohl, after managing the reunification, had a better image. 3/4 of SPD voters said on election day that the chancellor is doing a great job in representing Germany in the world. How can you win an election if 3/4 of the SPD voters think you're doing a good job? 1/3 of all German voters said that we don't care which parties will form the government as long as Merkel is the chancellor. So it was her time. Germany is doing remarkably well in economic terms. The chancellor is on top of her popularity. So if she wouldn't have come up with a real victory this time, I would have said, then never. If you don't do it now, you will never do it. And having said all this, it's a paradoxical victory on the other hand, because she was so strong that she is now so weak on the other hand. Because on the last meters, she almost destroyed her former coalition partner, the Liberals, who were not able to come up with over 5%, and we have this 5% hurdle in the German parliament. So she is stronger than she ever was, but her former government has lost the majority. Altogether, the CDU and the FDP has lost votes and not gained them. Which means what we will see now, and I believe for a pretty long time, is a lot of back and forth trying to form a government in Germany. This will be not an easy task. The chancellor has a good instinct. She said on the evening of election day, well, it might well be that nobody else wants to form a government with us. And as of today, she's right. Both possible partners, the SPD or the Greens, they're extremely reluctant. And the reason for that is pretty simple. They all fear that there will come out of this next coalition shaken, badly shaken, and much smaller than they went in. And remember that happened to everybody who was in a coalition with the chancellor before. The SPD did it, and they went out badly shaken. The FDP went in with almost 15% and came out with less than 5%. So whoever is now thinking about forming a government is obsessed by the fear that death will destroy their party's future. How will all this end up? I'm sure we will talk about it. What was a striking moment for me was that before this election only in small circles of journalists or of politicians. There was this nasty talk about Angela Merkel being a little bit like the Black Widow spider, who used to be where the female is eating the male. This apparently made it up even in primetime TV now, coming up with the idea that Chancellor Merkel might be the political equivalent to the Black Widow spider. So there will be testing and interesting times coming up in Germany. There are only one thing or two things I would predict today. One is we will not see any kind of minority government in Germany. They're pretty common in Scandinavia, for example, but Germans are obsessed with stability, and they will never form it. So they would go to elect again, but they wouldn't form this minority government. And the second thing is, even if it takes longer, I don't see any risk for the Eurozone, for example. It might well be that decisions could come up, Greece, for example. But whenever was the Euro in real danger in the last 2 years, the German parliament was able to react quickly and strongly, and the majority in the German parliament is overwhelming in supporting the euro. There's a lot of talk about is it enough or not, but whenever we come to one of these red lines where it's really getting dangerous, the Chancellor could always count on the SPD and the Greens for any kind of emergency help. So it might well be that for the first time in Germany's history or recent history, it might take a couple of months before forming a government, but I don't see that anything will go wrong until then. Thank you. I'll leave it with that here.
Great. Soledad?
Great, thank you. So the big takeaway from the election, the US election in 2012, is that America is very divided. And I think that is ultimately, if you had to sort of pick one thing, is the thing that gave Barack Obama the victory in the 2012 election, and maybe an area where there's a similarity between the US election and the German election is the sense of how do you build off a win, hey, congratulations, to actually being able to find a coalition and being able to govern. Exhibit A, we're in shutdown. That's kind of a problem. In an economy that was recovering very slowly, in fact, every month we would sort of breathlessly talk about the jobs numbers. Oh, in 10 minutes we'll have the job numbers. In 5 minutes, the jobs numbers. You know, people were sort of watching, and media leading it all. The jobs numbers, there was consistent and very sluggish recovery in the jobs numbers. And even the contentious Congress that seemed to be fighting absolutely everything all the time, the president still managed to win important states like Colorado and Iowa and Ohio and New Hampshire and Virginia and Wisconsin and Florida, and he practically swept the battleground states. So election night, I was at the CNN Center, and the night moved very fast. Some nights it doesn't. If you remember back not too long ago, where you're days and days later still trying to figure out who won the election. And we were able to declare a winner relatively early. And then the story shifted from what we had been covering, which was folks waiting in line, still trying to vote, and really using a lot of social media to tell people which lines are moving fast and how they shouldn't get out of line, to write to projections of a winner. So why was Barack Obama able to win? As many projected, it was the coalition that he was able to form, led in large part by Hispanics, helped in large part, I think, by Mr. Romney's missteps around Hispanics, that I'm sure got a lot of credit for an Obama victory. The challenge of having a bruising Republican primary pushed the former governor, who had been a fairly popular and quite moderate Republican from the state of Massachusetts. It forced him very far to the right. And part of the problem in a very long primary process was that they don't use tape today, but what we would say, there's a lot of tape, meaning every single thing you've said, it gives you the opportunity to say unfortunate things and then have them thrown back at you when you get out of the primary process. And that really did happen, certainly around immigration. Governor Romney talked in the primary about self-deportation, and I'm going to play a little clip from the primary. I can't remember exactly which date it was, but he started talking about the immigration question, and he said a solution could, in fact, be self-deportation. And if you listen for it, you'll hear people actually start laughing at the beginning till they realize that he's kind of serious. So listen.
So we're not going to round people up the way that we have in this society is to say, look, people who've come here illegally would, under my plan, be given a transition period and the opportunity during that transition period to work here. But when that transition period was over, they would no longer have the documentation to allow them to work in this country. At that point, they can decide whether to remain or whether to return home and to apply for legal residency in the United States, get in line with everybody else. And I know people think, but that's not fair to those that have come here illegally.
Isn't that what we have now? If somebody doesn't feel they have the opportunity to America, they can go back anytime they want to.
Yes, we have a card that indicates who's here legally, and if people are not able to have a card and have that through an e-verify system determine that they are here legally, then they're going to find they can't get work here. If people don't get work here, they're going to self-deport to a place where they can get work. Ultimately, with this transition period in place, we would then allow people to get in line at home and to come back to this country after they've reached the front of the line. But I just don't think it's fair to the people who have loved ones waiting in line legally to come to America and say, guess what? We're going to encourage a wave of illegal immigration again by giving amnesty of some kind to those that have come here illegally.
I remember watching this primary and thinking, so many words, like there were just so many words in that answer. And part of it was you could tell he really felt like he was dancing around a thing and kind of settled on self-deportation, which in fact would be a phrase that would come back to haunt him when he moved out of a primary battle where it was being dragged very much to the right and had to kind of make his way through a general election where people would just run tape like that and some other things. And it wasn't problematic for him just because of his philosophy that he stated around dealing with undocumented people. Certainly some of his colleagues on the stage that night, Rick Perry and Newt Gingrich, were talking about sort of different options, maybe more nuanced approaches to immigration, understanding the value of that constituency. But also, there seemed to be a sense of cruelty, right? I mean, among some that, you know, when you talk, Mr. Romney, who was a very wealthy man, at a time when income inequality was very much a conversation that was happening in the nation, the sense of the 1% versus the 99, to frame self-deportation, which, you know, loosely translated is economic deprivation to the point someone's so miserable or they're starving that in fact they have no other option to go back, that even people who did not necessarily have a dog in the fight on immigration felt that that sort of sounded sort of strange. And so when other issues would surface around income disparity, the 47% remark, if you remember that hidden camera video, or his tax returns that kept coming up, wouldn't he in fact release his tax returns, et cetera, that those sort of moments would only serve to underscore the gap between the wealthiest and those with less. That self-deportation term didn't help. The clip was run often when it got to the general election, and also would serve to galvanize Hispanics to vote against Mitt Romney and for President Obama. That issue of immigration, along with other social issues, really, I think, fueled what became at times a very bitter campaign. And the nastiness of that drove many people to the polls, again, in spite of some incredibly long lines. I remember my dad finally texting me and saying, I was stuck in the newsroom all day, but he said, I'm giving up. I've waited for 2.5 hours, I'm not voting. But most people actually looked at the long lines as a challenge because they felt that, in fact, their democratic freedoms may have been being encroached upon while they were standing in line. And so that they took it as a challenge to stay in line and vote. And then you can see what Mr. Obama did right on his own behalf in this election. His beginning was very inauspicious. His debate performance was so poor, the first debate, that it was actually almost bizarre. I mean, I remember watching that thinking, like, I wonder if he's going to wake up in the middle of this debate. Like, he was just completely out of it. I have a clip, and I'll show it to you, but because it's a compilation of moments, it actually doesn't quite capture how odd it was. But you can get a little bit of a sense of it, so we'll play that.
I just want to wish, sweetie, you happy anniversary and let you know that a year from now we will not be celebrating it in front of 40 million people.
I'm sure this was the most romantic place you could imagine, here with me. So the president has a view very similar to the view he had when he ran 4 years ago, that a bigger government, spending more, taxing more, regulating more, if you will, trickle-down government would work. That's not the right answer for America.
Governor Romney has a perspective that says if we cut taxes skewed towards the wealthy and roll back regulations, that we'll be better off. I've got a different view.
We're way over our first 15 minutes.
It's fun, isn't it?
It's okay, it's great.
Donald Trump is a small business. And I know Donald Trump doesn't like to think of himself as small anything.
It's not just Donald Trump you're taxing. It's all those businesses that employ 1/4 of the workers in America, these small businesses that are taxed as individuals. You raise taxes and you kill jobs.
Now, does anybody think that ExxonMobil needs some extra money?
Because you said you get a deduction for taking a plant overseas? Look, I've been in business for 25 years. I have no idea what you're talking about. I maybe need to get a new accountant.
Why wouldn't we eliminate tax breaks for corporate jets? My attitude is if you got a corporate jet, you can probably afford to pay full freight, not get a special break for it.
I'm sorry, Jim. I'm going to stop the subsidy to PBS. I'm going to stop other things. I like PBS. I love Big Bird. I actually like you, too. You've been president 4 years. You said you cut the deficit in half. It's now 4 years later. We still have trillion-dollar deficits. The CBO says we'll have a trillion-dollar deficit each of the next 4 years. If you're reelected, we'll get to a trillion-dollar debt.
So President Obama was able to recover from his performance. And again, you can see in those moments, it was actually sort of like get the words out. And it was Joe Biden's performance as well in the vice presidential debate that actually helped him tremendously. But the issue, as in Germany, was the economy. And the job numbers were steadily, kind of lamely, but steadily improving. So it was a challenge for a candidate to be in a position of seeming to root against economic recovery, right? I mean, and even with the polling showing the economy as the top issue, and this was consistent in virtually every single poll, polling around the direction of the question, you know, is the country heading in the right direction? Or were things getting worse, or is the country heading in the right direction? That actually was working for the Obama campaign, with more Americans saying, yes, this fragile improvement is heading in the right direction. So you can imagine for Governor Romney, whose pitch to the American people was his ability in the past 25 years running companies, and thusly his argument was that he'd be the best candidate for president. He had challenge in talking about leading a different direction, right? If everyone's saying, well, actually, we're going in the right direction, and your pitch is, I'm going to take you in a different direction, it's a little bit contradictory, and it's almost a similar thing of what you said about the chancellor, right? Never change a winning team. At that point, the economic numbers seem to be in this fledgling recovery. The argument seemed to be crumbling a little bit. And economics, where Mr. Romney was polling high, was a challenge for him on another front, though he held a margin, certainly, over President Obama when it came to who was stronger on economics. He stumbled a lot when it came to conversations around poverty. I mean, a lot. And so that was problematic. We did an interview when he was fresh off his victory in Florida. It was a big deal. He was taking a victory lap, had been doing rounds with reporters just to talk about his tremendous win in Florida. And in the interview that I did with him, he took a big stumble, and we'll play a little bit of that.
Message across the nation.
All right.
Wait, I'm in this race because I care about Americans. I'm not concerned about the very poor. We have a safety net there. If it needs repair, I'll fix it. I'm not concerned about the very rich. They're doing just fine. I'm concerned about the very heart of America, the 95% of Americans who right now are struggling, and I'll continue to take that message across the nation.
All right, I just know I said last question, but I gotta ask you, you just said, I'm not concerned about the very poor because they have a safety net. And I think there are lots of very poor Americans who are struggling who would say, that sounds odd. Can you explain that?
Well, you had to finish the sentence, Soledad. I said, I'm not concerned about the very poor that have a safety net, but if it has holes in it, I will repair them.
Got it. Okay.
The challenge right now, we will hear from the Democrat Party the plight of the poor. And there's no question, it's not good being poor, and we have a safety net to help those that are very poor. But my campaign is focused on middle-income Americans. My campaign, you can choose where to focus. You can focus on the rich, that's not my focus. You can focus on the very poor, that's not my focus. My focus is on middle-income Americans, retirees living on Social Security, people who can't find work, folks that have kids that are getting ready to go to college. These are the people who've been most badly hurt during the Obama years. We have a very ample safety net, and we can talk about whether it needs to be strengthened or whether there are holes in it, but we have food stamps, we have Medicaid, we have housing vouchers, we have programs to help the poor. But the middle-income Americans, they're the folks that are really struggling right now, and they need someone that can help get this economy going for them.
So I think that probably a PR specialist would say, whatever you do, never say out loud on the record, I don't care about the poor. Never say, it's not good being poor. Like, that's just, regardless of what you personally believe, from a strategy, that's just not a winning strategy. President Obama had a lot of ground on that front. He lost some of the margins that he had seen in 2008. He lost some ground with younger voters. He lost ground with black voters slightly. He lost ground with Jewish voters. His coalition, though, pretty much resembled the coalition that he built in 2008. Hispanic voters, though, and Asian voters grew in their support in 2012. And at one point, Latino voters represented 1 in 10 voters overall. Obama held on to female voters, especially single women, and he lost white men. Governor Romney won white men. He won older people, he won wealthier people, he won evangelicals, and he won Tea Partiers. But the challenge for Governor Romney is actually in that little, if you made that into a graph, which is that's not the face of the changing America, right? That list is not actually the direction demographically where the nation is going. That coalition also was often challenging and made a bumpy road along the way with debates about abortion and contraception and rape, often derailing the narrative of the morning, regardless of what was happening on the presidential race front. Suddenly there would be someone in the coalition who was talking about something that then would have to be dealt with, and it was really undermining and proved to undermine a lot of the governor's female support. What buoyed Obama was a demographic shift. He was able to lose the white male vote. He lost the white men in America massively, and he could still win. Social issues played a role as well. In addition to immigration, gay marriage, of course, took center stage. Some predicted that he would lose his support among black Americans by embracing gay marriage, and it did dip a few points, but it was a very minor. He took more than 90% of the black vote. Independents are often, obviously, really focused on during American elections and pined for by any candidate. Governor Romney won the independents, but not enough, not a big enough number to make any real difference. And jobs, especially specifically the auto industry in Ohio, became a critical point toward the end of the election with the focus on the auto industry bailout back in 2009, that conversation taking center stage. So I think that, as we saw in the autopsy that the GOP did after the election, they had a demographics problem. High on their list of things to fix was they had to get a different mix of voters. Hispanics, they literally did a chart that said, what we need to fix. And it was like, we need to add new voters. Number 1, Hispanics. Number 2, there was a list. The shift away from geography and a shift to demography, I think, is an interesting shift to consider and underlies all of this change. There was a quote from a CNN contributor and a Republican strategist, and it was very revealing. She said this at the end of the night, election night. She said, we've got to start thinking about growing the party, which is kind of an odd thing to say the night after the election, right? That's not the time to be thinking about growing the party. Before the election would be the time. It seemed kind of late in the game to be considering all the demographic changes. And someone was joking that that there was a secret document that pointed out that this change was coming, and it was called the U.S. Census, and that anybody could have came out every 10 years, and if you read it, you would kind of have an idea what was coming down the pike. So finally, the last thing I'll talk about is Hurricane Sandy, which also played a role in how this went down. So there was a combination, I think, of sort of issues, and then social issues, and then just what was happening in the zeitgeist. Hurricane Sandy came in, events were canceled, and there was a national focus on the storm, and President Obama got to play a very big role in being, in a way, the hero, walking through the devastated area, being escorted through with Governor Chris Christie, who very clearly seemed to have his own presidential ambitions, spoke glowingly about President Obama, and that changed the narrative a bit as well, and I'll play this last clip for you.
Great boys. And we're in the business of politics. So we're both aware of the fact that the election's in 6 days. Yeah, I asked him about where he's going to be campaigning and what he's going to do next and all the rest of that. But, you know, we spent most of our time talking about the problems and how to deal with them. But we're cognizant of the political side. But here's the bottom line: what the people of New Jersey know about me. When it comes to getting things done, I don't care what party somebody's in. But my relationships with Democrats, the same way my relationship with Republicans, are about getting things done. And the President of the United States and I have now had 6 conversations since Sunday. That shows to me a level of caring and concern and interest that I think a leader should be giving to this type of situation. So today,
so that chunk right there, that's the ad, right? That shows a level of caring.
I said goodbye to him at Air Force One. This was as comfortable.
We can stop rolling this.
And
it goes on and on. He's doing a press conference. But, you know, right there is the quote that you have a solidly Republican leader in New Jersey in the aftermath of a disaster giving you the best possible endorsement you could ever have. A huge fallout for Governor Christie in that. So that's sort of a 10-minute version of some of the issues that played a role in the U.S. election in 2012. And I think we're seeing some of those challenges today being played out in the shutdown that we're experiencing. You know, Jon Stewart, you know, was pointing out sort of the role of gerrymandering and carving up the districts, and the sort of the party politics that lead to a very strong, you know, initial challenge that drags everybody to the right, and then they have to kind of come back to the center or slightly to the left as they head into the general election. That is a real challenge. And I think that has led a lot to a lot of the resurgence and strength of the Tea Party. Michelle Bachmann was quoted the other day saying that Republicans were happy, I'm going to misquote her a little bit, but roughly said they were happiest than they've been in a while about the shutdown. And again, I think that's a challenging message at a time when people are losing their jobs and there's not a lot of people polling who feel like the shutdown is a net gain for the nation. So how do you govern? How do you build a coalition when you come from a very divided place where you started? Has control been lost of the GOP, and how do you bring that back so that actually both sides want to come together and move forward on the agenda of the nation? I think that's going to be the real challenge in the days and years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. I now will take the chair's prerogative and ask a question of each of you, and then we'll open things up to the floor. My first question is for Mr. Mascolo. Does this election reflect or expose a fundamental shift in German party politics? Is the CDU now a centrist party and the SPD increasingly marginal? And is Die Linke here to stay?
I start with the easy part. If Die Linke will stay, I have no doubt about it. They're a cornerstone in the political arena since 1990. I don't see them disappearing soon. Actually, Die Linke is 2 parties. They have a lot of crazy people from the West, former communists, and then they have a lot of people who came out of the system of the former GDR. Many of them are smart politicians. Many of them could easily be at the SPD. Many of them could easily form a government with the Greens and the Social Democrats. So what I would predict for the future is that what we have seen now is that
given the fact that in the German parliament there is a leftist majority of Greens, SPD, and Linke, and they could form a government, which will not happen now because nobody will go on or form a government with the leftist. This is something which will change over the next years. And I believe that the leftist party will think over their political positions as the Greens did it 15, 20 years ago. As some of you might be aware, the leftist party, for example, is demanding that Germany is leaving NATO. And this is something no other party could agree on. But on the other hand, they have an internal discussion going on. If this has to be their position, for the next 2, 5, 10 years, because they see now that this is the biggest obstacle, this foreign policy position they have. Usually foreign policy is almost bipartisan in Germany, but this is a real obstacle. So what I see is that they're rethinking a couple of their positions, and then there might be a leftist government in the near future. Is
CDU?
Yeah. Well, what are their positions? Since I'm observing politics in Germany, I haven't seen such a non-controversial election campaign as in this year. So what are the real topics? What are the real differences between the Social Democrats and the CDU? I couldn't tell you. We could now go into the details, and I promise you it would get boring for you after 30 seconds, and it would be the same for me. There are a couple of differences, but there is large agreement, really large agreement, and only a very few controversial points left. The SPD is always claiming that Chancellor Merkel is a social democrat. You might know that in her own party she is called Mutti or Mommy, and Mommy cares. Mommy cares for everybody. That's why she got reelected. She has no image at all of being what she was in the past, of being outspoken for tough reforms, deep cuts into the welfare system, taxes going down, whatever it is, whatever you would think of a theoretically conservative politician. I don't see real conservative politics in politicians in Germany today. There are only a very few left. They are all in the middle. Once again, it's not uncontroversial. So and they could easily form a government and agreeing on most topics pretty soon.
Thank you. Sounds like the 1970s in the United States. Parties were described as having no difference. A question for Ms. O'Brien. Sort of the opposite problem of Germany, or the opposite situation as Germany. Can Obama govern from the center in his second term as Merkel is poised to do so in Germany? Does his electoral coalition and the Democrats' electoral coalition in some way prevent that?
I think the answer might be yes. And I think sometimes foreigners have a vision of President Obama, and maybe because he's African American, that somehow he is incredibly liberal, and that and even socialist. But as I say often, if you look at what he's actually done, he's actually a terrible socialist. I mean, if you look at the bank bailout, or you even look at some of the legislation around children in school and education funding. Like he's bad at socialism, and so I think that he's not this sort of far left candidate as he sometimes is believed to be or portrayed to be. I did a very enjoyable interview with Christine O'Donnell, who was running for the Senate in Delaware, and at one point she was telling me that he was a communist. I said, well, what's a communist? And She couldn't answer the question. Didn't know. So in the United States, those kinds of terms are actually thrown around, but they're more of a stone to hit someone with versus an actual understanding of a political philosophy, I think. But I don't know that he is going to be compelled to go to the center. Certainly, if you look at the shutdown now, like where's the negotiation points on that? That might be a bad example. I think what you're certainly going to see is whoever wants to win the next election is absolutely going to have to figure out how to appeal to a wider coalition. The next candidate probably likely will not get the African American numbers that President Obama got, and that white vote is going to be increasingly important. You're going to have a larger number of Latinos who've now entered the voting electorate, and where they go, I think, is going to be, it's going to have a real impact on that election. I think the reason the autopsy was done by the GOP was to try to figure out, like, what are the positions that we have to stake in order to get access to this group of people? What do we have to say? How do we get women who fled the party? So I don't know that he's going to be compelled over the next year, that he has to. But certainly in the next election, I think that is going to be a real challenge because the country is very divided. And if you want to appeal to you have to build that coalition, you're going to have to really figure out how to speak to, navigate the primary process, which sort of works against that, and then figure out how to speak to the middle.
Thank you.
You bet.
Steve, may I add one sort, what is probably the biggest difference between the system you have here in the United States and the system we have in Germany? What is most important for politicians to get reelected? I believe it's trust. And what is the most dangerous thing for every politician not to get reelected, this is disappointment by the people. You hear with the limit of 2 terms, you have the stage cleared after 8 years. You get reelected once, and then you have 2 new persons coming in, and they have to make their case, and then it's wide open then. We don't have this limited terms in Germany. We had Helmut Kohl, who lost the elections after 16 years. We have Chancellor Merkel, who is now in her 3rd term. So what is the difference between politicians who can go on as long as they want? They probably try not to disappoint people. So does this end up with tough reforms, going on to modernize the country, or is it in the system that you try to balance all this to get re-elected as long as possible? Is something we should think about in Europe. Sometimes there is a discussion if there should be limited terms, 2 or 3. And personally, I believe in this idea. There shouldn't be chancellors or any politicians going on and getting re-elected forever and ever and ever. So this could be a real achievement if we think about if the American system has some real advantages in it.
And I would argue that in the United States, the thing that's most important in getting elected is not trust, and not getting elected is lack of trust, but money. I mean, if you look at the amount of money spent in the U.S. election, right, you can have the greatest message in the world. If you cannot get it out, if you're not able to flood the airwaves, if you're not able to have the money to do that. I mean, the battle in 2012 was a battle of cash and trying to get access, social media as well. But really, I mean, the money spent was phenomenal.
Soledad,
you can be the most trustworthy person in the world. If you don't have a couple $1 billion now to get your message out, you're going to lose.
I agree, but I wanted to be one of the friendly Germans coming in.
So we had a first question over here, and then we'll just sweep around the room.
Hi. I'm Herbert Quelle. I was German ambassador to Azerbaijan. And George, we are looking forward to having you as a co-fellow at the Weatherhead Center. Yeah. My first question, if I may ask 2 brief questions, goes to Soledad. If you could give us your interpretation of what relevance, what importance Germany has for the Obama administration? And the second question to George, you gave this one scenario of re-elections as a possibility if no government is formed. I admit it's a small probability or small probability, but still, if it happens, may the FDP not have wept too many tears at this stage?
So I'm happy to start, and I would say I think it's huge, but maybe not for the reasons that you would agree with. I think the relevance of Merkel's victory to the Obama campaign is actually they are always about the numbers. And you can bet that they are analyzing, I mean, what you described and what went behind her win and how really she has now had the victory as opposed to sort of her party. This is the first time there she is actually the victor. They do an incredible job of analyzing the data around what makes someone win. And so I think that they're going to really look into that and try to understand how that relates, and that will help define what that relationship is going to be. And I think that also the position that she's had certainly in being very conservative and strong and having a great support, that will have resonance as well for the Obama campaign and the Obama administration now. So I think it's big, but I know, having worked with people who are the number crunchers in the campaign, that they are constantly assessing data in that way. Like, what exactly happened in terms of numbers around every single thing that moves polls. So I think it's going to be fascinating to them.
Yep. The question is essentially what will happen, and will we see re-elections or not, a grand coalition, or the Greens forming a coalition? I get this question since 1 week in Washington, and I always try to duck it. And the reason for that is pretty simple. I have no clue. I was on the phone with a lot of people whom I know well, a lot of old sources, and I don't get anything. And I believe the reason for that is nobody has a clue. So they all know that somehow a government has to be formed. The SPD know it. The SPD has, of course, an interest in it that not the Greens will end up in a government with Chancellor Merkel, because that would mean that they lose their last ally they have. You might be aware that in the majority of the German federal states, there are governments formed by the SPD and the Greens. So if the Greens would turn over to Chancellor Merkel, this could mean that for the next 15, 20 years, we would see a stable majority from Chancellor Merkel and the Green Party and the SPD getting nothing. So there's a tremendous pressure on almost everybody now. What I would predict is if we see re-elections, then you see either an absolute majority by Chancellor Merkel, or you see the FDP and going back into the parliament. And of course, the SPD is aware that new elections will make nothing easier. But once again, I think we have to wait a couple of days, maybe even weeks, to get some hints on where the train is moving now.
Can I ask a question? Is the conversation in Germany around all the other leaders who were dealing with the fiscal crisis as well, who lost their jobs, right? Who were elected out? I mean, not only did she survive, but she thrived. And I think that's going to be another really interesting sort of focus of analysis.
Absolutely. Yeah. Usually in Europe, we are more in an age of distrust when it comes to politicians. Usually you don't get reelected. She got reelected. But maybe the truth in it is that many governments or presidents, chancellors who lost their jobs in other states, lost it in those states who are badly hit by the crisis. Germany is not badly hit by the crisis. It's exactly the other way around. And the Germans love the way the chancellor is handling the crisis. She's always talking about solidity and solidarity and the helping hand, but not giving away hard-earned German taxpayers' money too easily. And this goes well with the German audience, because they believe that the chancellor is achieving both goals, rescuing the euro on the one hand, and on the other hand, being extremely careful with Germany's money. And as of today, it worked. And I think this is another very large point. The chancellor got the credit for that. And this is a huge point why she got reelected.
And it's an interesting, I think, analogy back to the United States, right? That is kind of the dilemma here. How do you navigate between being fiscally responsible and also being helpful? How do you not become a complete welfare state to the detriment of building business? And yet, how do you help people who need that safety net that might have a hole that Governor Romney talked about? You know, like that is the navigation that she clearly is being able to do very brilliantly. And I think that that's what people are going to look for as well.
There's a question in the back.
Thank you. My name is Carolyn Reuter. I'm a grad student at the History Department here. I have a question to Ms. O'Brien about the question of a divided country. So you showed us a couple of clips showing basically that voters are very easily influenced by those momentums in a campaign. When you say the country is divided, is there also, do you mean not only like for whom they voted, or is there a fundamental division in values? Is it, you know, for a semi-informed outsider, sometimes seems there is a mass of like redneckish Bible people who vote for the Republicans, and everyone else reads the New York Times and votes for the Democrats. Obviously, it's an oversimplification, but how does this division actually look like? And is it something which is more fundamental and goes back way longer than just the recent elections?
I think it would depend on who you're asking in their analysis of the polls. But in certain issues, it's divided. And then there's also a divide that happens generationally, right? So if you ask the question about gay marriage, overall, 50-50, support and against. However, if you're looking generationally, younger people overwhelmingly support gay marriage. So I think that there is this division of voters. They're divided on abortion. They're divided on gay marriage. They're divided on lots of social issues. They're divided on which direction the economy should go. They're divided on immigration. So the voting populace is actually very divided. My challenge as a reporter has always been, that's polling. When you actually go and do interviews with people and you talk to them anecdotally, I see people as actually very united, right? Even people who call themselves African American or Asian American don't see themselves as, that's a divisive thing. They see that as, I am reveling in what's great about America, right? We're a melting pot and I'm just talking about my little piece of the melting pot. I also see people talking about very shared values. They all want, I've done documentaries on coal miners in West Virginia, African Americans in Mississippi, Asian Americans in Seattle, across the board. Muslims in Tennessee, they all want their kids to have a better opportunity than they had. They all want to figure out how to afford education. It is absolutely killing them. They are all trying to figure out how to deal with this really racial tension that seems to bubble up. Trayvon Martin would be a very good example of something coming to the surface, right? So on one hand, polling-wise, we're very divided. But on the other hand, there are these shared American values that I think people have. And I think that's part of the dilemma. I don't see people as divided as the polls might read. They'll say, well, I'm a Democrat, except that I believe in blah, blah, blah. Or, listen, I am a staunch Republican, except I don't agree with blah, 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 blah. And so, you know, what gap, you know, who fills that gap, I think is the challenge. I think that's back to the can you govern from the center? Is there enough people that you could really appeal to people at that position? And I don't know the answer to that. But at times, certainly in the polls, we're very polarized.
Right. Let's take a couple questions and gather them so we can speed it up. Right up here.
My name is Hans-Helmut Kotz. I'm an economist visiting the Center for European Studies. So I liked very much the way you presented the outcome of the German election could be understood. Economists have a very simple idea about that. They talk about the median voter.
The what?
The median voter. Mm-hmm. So which basically explains that ultimately everybody somehow ends up in the middle. And this middle is pretty different from the US here, by the way. If you wouldn't need an explanation for communism, just look at the median voter. in Europe. They accept social security and support to a level which would be unimaginable here. But my question is about the party which you didn't mention, which is the Alternative for Germany, reflecting a huge media interest critical on how German politics has been doing all the bailout activity and so forth in Europe. So this is Germany, but is also highly divisive in France, in Italy, in Greece, and so forth. And if you look at how German politics moved ever since 2009, it's really difficult to find anything like consistency in that. Continuously changing course, doing things which they often said we'd never do that in order to do it. So how do you think that will pan out over the next couple of years, given that the Alternative almost managed 4.7 percentage points, and possibly having drawn lots of support, not only from Free Democrats, but also Social Democrats, Conservatives?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I have to say that I wasn't surprised that AfD did well in these elections, given the fact that many people in Germany are convinced that at least the full truth about what the costs of rescuing the euro will be are not on the table. Actually, the two former SPD chancellors, Gerhard Schröder and Helmut Schmidt, gave an interview together a couple of days before the election, saying there is a great lie out, and Germans will have to pay hundreds of billions right after the elections. So there is a growing sense in the German population that, as I've said, that it's a good thing and that it's in Germany's interest to rescue the euro, but that truth is in short supply. Given that fact, it's not that astonishing that a party running on a clear ticket of saying, we are against it, comes close to the 5% hurdle. I wouldn't make too much out of it. We have seen protest parties, right-wing parties in Germany's history from time to time, sometimes on a federal level, mostly on a state level, on Länder level. And after a certain while, they disappeared. It was never long-lasting. And I believe the reason for that is pretty simple. Germans have a very good sense in what went wrong in their history and what burden of history Germany is still bearing. And Germans have a good sense that the 68 years since the end of World War II are the happiest in Germany's history at all. So before a real right-wing radical party will gain momentum in Germany, I would be always hopeful that I will not see it in my life, and my kids will not see it. Does that mean that the AfD will disappear pretty soon? No. I would believe that they come in the European Parliament. Next May, we have European elections. And the bad thing is that there will be a lot of this kind of parties from Greece, France, you name it. So what I really fear is that with all the ideas we have about reforming Europe and having a European Parliament, that maybe a quarter or even 1/3, some people predict, will be from parties with whom you can't work at all. So, and then the AfD among them. But again, for the stability of the German system as of today, I would say don't worry too much.
There's one right here and then up front.
Hello, my name is Valerie Vonderton. I'm a grad student at the Harvard Kennedy School. And a common denominator between the US and Germany these days seems to be this extreme focus on the person on top, on the person instead of the program. And I'm wondering, would you say, like, how would you say, does this personalization of politics hurt or help your respective countries? And I think we're collecting questions.
Personalization.
Oh, so I would,
Let's
you're
collect a
collecting,
couple
sorry.
just to.
My name's Hannah Winnick. I'm also from the Kennedy School. My question is for Soledad. So I'm wondering if you're seeing any signs of the Republican Party or some factions within the Republican Party beginning to target young Latino voters, and if you think that someone like Marco Rubio might have a chance at a sort of a viable Republican candidacy in the next election.
Let's grab one more question right up front.
Thank you. My name is Richard Rosen from the TELUS Institute in Boston. I spend a lot of time in Germany, but I still don't understand exactly why the SPD is quite so afraid to get into the government with Merkel. I understand the point about losing voters and whatever, but what choice do they really have given the problems of having a new election? So, for example, wouldn't Merkel try to seduce them into a coalition, say by giving away on the minimum wage? I assume that the minimum wage proposal is a key issue, but why wouldn't she just give in on that, or would that not be sufficient?
Great. So why don't we take the personality question first, and then we'll...
Certainly in the United States, the politics of the personal is, I think, absolutely prevalent. The downside is that you end up giving credence to people who are more attractive, if they have wonderful teeth, they're tall and strapping and good skin, that probably gains you a large number of points in an election, which is kind of a tragedy. On the other hand, the politicians themselves have learned to really leverage that, right? So there's not one politician that I've ever interviewed who hasn't come ready with their own personal narrative. You know, my story is really a coming-of-age story. At a young age, I lost my dad, and that taught me about responsibility. It allowed me to build my business, and what I found, you know, I mean, that, so everyone, and that's not just American politics, right? That we are the land of the reality TV show, which is, you know, this is a story, exactly. This is the story of this person, and that, I think, certainly in journalism, is how we try to make those stories palatable to people. If we believe that if you actually sat down and walked through someone's policy papers, everyone would yawn and fall asleep and you'd lose all your viewers. But if you sort of tell a compelling story or you talk about a cat fight between the spouses of the candidates, it's much more interesting. So I think there's a plus and a minus. I think that there is a question about understanding someone's character. I'm a big believer that, you know, I like to know someone's character. Yes, if they have done something terrible to their spouse in the past, I think that is an interesting thing that absolutely, as a voter, that influences how I feel about them. Does that necessarily determine my vote? No, but it is actually something that I think about. In New York, we were dealing with the, Wiener was running for the mayor. I mean, please. You know, the politics of the personal was the only thing that led that campaign. And so I think it is absolutely the case. And there are pros and cons to it. In terms of a young Latino like Marco Rubio, absolutely. And I think he's very much been groomed and has been for a long time. Again, what's he going to do in the primary? Here's the thing. There are cameras everywhere now. There's nothing that you can say at any time that someone is not rolling on you if you are even slightly interesting as a candidate. So what are you going to tell your constituents who consist of Tea Partiers and evangelicals in the primary that you're then going to have to turn sharply, the etch-a-sketch moment, you know, and let's shake it and just start again. What are you going to say in the general election? That is kind of the minefield that has to be navigated. Could Marco Rubio do it? Sure, I think absolutely. He has that classic American immigrant narrative story. But it's going to be a tricky, it's a real challenge, I think, for any Republican candidate to make that sharp turn. That's a problem.
Personality in Germany, and what will the SPD do?
Personality in Germany, yeah, it's more important than it was in the past, and the reason for that is pretty simple. Party affiliation is not as important as it was in the past. You know, when I was young, somebody was either a voter for the CDU or for the SPD, and usually you stood for generations with that, and it happened only very slowly that people decided to change from one side of the political system to the other one. It's so different today. You know, people might vote for CDU on one day and for the SPD the other day they vote for the FDP. And I mean, I see it with my own kids who voted this year for the first time. They turned 18. So, and there was a lot of back and forth in our family, you know, and some parties were excluded from the beginning, but many others were, you know, every morning on the kitchen table, you know, what are they doing? So, and I think here in the States, personality is even more important. We see it on a smaller level in Germany, which is very exciting, when it comes to regional elections. Then it's all about personality. You know, in Hamburg, the new mayor of Hamburg, who is SPD, he scored an absolute majority. I don't remember when that happened the last time. And the reason for that was his personality. You know, very down to earth, somebody people trusted that he will run a government and will do a good job. So, and with that, he was able to score this absolute majority. And now to your question. I know that the question would come back through the back door, and I do my best. Minimum wage, more posts for secretary in the government for the SPD. All this will be on the table. And on the other hand, the SPD knows one thing for sure. Whatever they do, it will not really help them because they will not get the credit for that. And nothing what the chancellor is giving away will ever hurt here. So the mayor of Berlin, Klaus Wowereit, gave an interview the other day, and there was a smart thought in it. He's running a grand coalition in Berlin. And he said, you know, it doesn't matter what I give away. It's my show anyway. You know, the winner takes it all. So whatever the minority partner might demand and gets, it always ends up that the credit, if it works, ends up with the one in the driver's seat. And this is the real problem the SPD is facing.
Let's take these two questions.
Hi, Soledad. I'm a new student at Harvard University. I was looking at the one when you were doing the interview with candidate Romney, and I thought it was a very important moment in the election. How does it feel for you as a journalist to have such impact in the election? How do you manage that power and bias?
Well, my show was canceled, so I'm not sure there's any power at all in that. I enjoyed it. I mean, I love studying for interviews, so for me, as a reporter, it's just really great to dig into the Congressional Budget Office report, and I like to work a lot of transcripts, because what I found was that most politicians would come on and lie and sort of spin, and so you really needed to kind of bring them back around to the actual literal transcript and read it back to them. I enjoyed that kind of back and forth. I don't think that led to any power at all, clearly, but I certainly have always enjoyed being a reporter, whether I got to do live interviews or I'm working more on documentaries now.
Yeah, Thiel Zimmerman. I'm also from the Weather Ad Center. I'm doing a PhD here for 1 year. One small backdoor question again regarding the SPD. Wouldn't be the actually only logical solution for the SPD be to say, okay, we make a big coalition with the CDU, but without Merkel? I mean, of course, this would be very difficult because of her high popularity, but it's the only way to go into a government on the same level.
I can actually answer that. That's never going to happen.
That's pretty easy. Okay, Soledad, do me the favor.
Any last question from this side of the room? Maybe else?
I mean, last time I checked, the SPD has not lost their mind. They lost the election. No.
Thank you. I'm Catherine Kluva from the Future Diplomacy Project at the Harvard Kennedy School. My question is on foreign policy, because that might be arguably the one thing that the president can rescue from his second term as a positive legacy. And in Germany, we've had this really interesting phenomenon that's the same in the United States. We've wrested foreign policy out of, in some ways, the State Department or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's become pulled into the Chancellery. We arguably had in Germany the weakest foreign minister that we've ever had with this last administration. And German foreign policy, the Americans expect a lot of the Germans, and the Germans aren't very willing to give. Josef Joffe had a wonderful article on the cover page of the Zeit in early August to say, well, German foreign policy is all about hurting nobody and least of all ourselves. So I think it'd be interesting for the two of you to reflect a little bit on foreign policy and the relationship of the two countries and the priorities that they might have together or not.
I'm not sure President Obama is going to be able to pull out a huge victory. I mean, if you look at his most recent challenges in Syria, that's bad, and that's a problem. And so I think that's going to be a problem that haunts him for a little while. Right now, the shutdown has kind of brought the nation's focus back to domestic issues. But I think that that's going to be a tough navigation and a big misstep on a lot of fronts. So I'm not sure that that's going to happen.
Germany?
On Reunification Day, which is today, the German President Joachim Gauck gave a speech addressing exactly that question. So what has to be Germany's role in the world? What do we have to deliver? How do we deal with the more and more upcoming criticism that Germany is only relying on the system of stability but not contributing to it? I think this criticism is partly fair and it's partly unfair. Germany is still in Afghanistan, and I haven't heard that everybody made a big thing out of that France left, for example. Germany is still in Kosovo. Germany made a huge mistake when it came to Libya, because even thinking about that there could be a policy without France and without the United States was a real mistake. So, let's talk about Syria for a second. Could I imagine that the German government would vote for a military strike and be part of it? I think no party would do so. Does it mean that Germany can't play a constructive role when it comes to Germany? I think it can. Germany has a long history in helping when it comes to disarmament. Germany built the factories in Russia. Germany has a special responsibility when it comes to chemical weapons because, as we all know, sarin was developed in Germany. And for quite a long time, many countries in the Middle East were only able to get their hand on these weapons because German companies helped them. So I believe there are many areas in which Germany can and Germany should contribute more to the system of stability and worldwide peace. I'm not that sure if it's the right sort always to demand that Germany should do more when it comes to military operations. And as a former correspondent in the United States, I have to say, for me, it's striking coming back into this country and to see that the discussions about the very idea of going militarily somewhere are so close now when it comes to benefits and costs of doing so, are pretty similar to the discussions I know back home in Germany or in Europe. So I would hope that there will be common ground in the future within America thinking twice now or even third times before doing so, and Europe, that we might be able to reach common ground in all this.
Thank you. That's a very nice note to end on. And there will be reception following. We hope that you can all join us. And those who have lingering questions, please step forward at the reception. Thank you very much, Soledad.
Thank you.
Thank you, Georg. Thank you.